Okay, so I thought I would do a little comparison between the limited edition etched glass Steam Deck and the 512 OLED Steam Deck, but first I'm going to do a few things to it. I want to see if adding PTM7950 compound makes a big difference. Also, we'll be putting on this JSAUX backplate because I wanted to see both the etched glass limited edition and the regular Steam Deck in person. And for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of, I am and I am not a huge fan of the styling on this device. I do think it looks really good. It looks more orange than orangish rust red to me, which the bright orange is not, to my eye, is not exactly what I thought it was when I first got it. Not to mention, I do find the orange thumbsticks and the off black faceplate mildly distracting, and also the etched glass versus glossy debate rages on. But I think I want to actually take this 512 OLED and keep it instead. I just like the flat back on the front, and then I'll have a see-through third-party case on the back, which I like. So, but I don't want 512. I do want a 2 terabyte drive, which is why I have this 2 terabyte WD SN740 right here. So that should be more than adequate. And while I have this device open, I want to install this PTM7950, and then we can compare and see how well they did with each other. Compared to each other, that is. So let's go ahead and open this up. On the back, I'm using the case that it comes with to do this, just to kind of keep things straight. I'm going to use a T6 Torx. And let's go ahead and starting with this bolt right here, we'll take it apart and see what we need to do to upgrade the SSD. I have entered it into battery mode, battery storage mode that is. And what that is in the BIOS. It lets you make it so it does not turn on accidentally. By pushing the power button, you literally have to plug it in to the USB in order for it to turn on once you're in that mode, which is good because we don't want to be accidentally turning it on in the middle of having the case off the back. So the nice thing about the OLED Steam Deck is all of the backplate screws are the same size versus the OG. So you don't need to worry as much about which screw you're putting where, although I still like to put them in the same holes that I took them out of for, I don't know, OCD purposes. So I do set them aside so I know where they came out of. Now my understanding is that the back plates that are interchangeable between the OG and the OLED. So once I have this off, we'll take a look at that, comparing it to the JSAUX V2 backplate. And what I found is the Steam Deck, you want to insert your pick in this location. And I have found it can be really rough to get these started on some of these devices, although this was not. The limited edition seemed actually fairly difficult to open at this step, but this one seemed fairly easy. So we're just going to work our way around. And then getting this to start is also sometimes tricky along the top. That was not bad at all. Okay, so there is the OLED backplate. Here's what I'll be replacing it with. So we'll see how that goes. So this will be a combo, different backplate and new thermal paste. And the nice thing is we'll be able to compare it to the stock that I've not touched the cooling system at all on this one, and we'll be able to do back-to-back testing to see which one runs cooler. So that should be interesting. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around so it's the right direction. And what we're going to be doing is removing the shielding. My understanding is that the shielding does no longer have any thermal pads on the back of it, but we'll double check it and see what it looks like. Again, remember, I am removing each of these screws in such a manner that I remember which screw goes where. It's not, I mean, these screws I'm pulling out right here are different than the backplate ones, so anyways, just good practice. Okay, the other thing that you'll probably want to do on the OLED version that you didn't have to do before is this ribbon cable runs across the back of the backplate. So it's going to be in our best interest to flip this up and get it out of the way. So yeah, that white part is on a hinge and it flips up. And then it's best to grab the hard plastic piece that's right there, and that just comes out. And what that's going to let us do is more easily entertain the insides of this thing. And keep in mind it is taped down to the speaker wire along the bottom as well. So let's take a close look at what that looks like. And so it's just a bit of tape going on right there, which I think the best thing to do would be to actually remove very carefully the speaker. There it is, and that is going to allow us to just kind of flip this over like this. This is not absolutely necessary to unclip this and the speaker wire if you're just changing the SSD. You can kind of maneuver around it without flipping this like this, but since I'm going to be accessing this to change the thermal paste, that's why I'm doing that right now. So the next step is going to be unplugging the battery, because we don't want that to interfere with our process at all. So we're going to unclip the battery. Pretty straightforward here. The next step is going to be removing the basically the heat pipe. So it's 1, 2, 3, and that's the direction that you turn these down. So I'm going to start with 3. And you can see the underside of this backplate has no pads like the original did. So we'll start with 3. Again, I'm going to keep these screws in a map as I take them off so I know which hole they go back into. There is the last one. Okay, so let's take a look at it. Oh, the other thing that looks like we'll need to do is undo the fan. So there is a screw here. A screw here. that is going to let this come off. However, there's still the little fan cable on there, so actually it's probably a good idea to take that off. So let me do that. We're learning together here. Okay, so that comes off a little trickly, but we now have this off. So we're going to clean both the die and the heat pipe. So Q-tips are a great way to handle this. I kind of spin the Q-tip as I go to kind of pull all the material off. And almost more Q-tips better. And once you've gotten the majority of the material off, I like to take some rubbing alcohol, fill up the cap, get your Q-tip wet with the rubbing alcohol, and just get it super nice and clean. And there we go. So now we can get into the fun stuff. This stuff is kind of hard to work with. It's like hard but not hard. So for example, it has liners on both the front and the back, and I'm going to cut off a piece that's going to fit mostly exactly right on the die. And I'll do that. I'll just kind of measure, see how we're looking. You're best off cutting it too big to start. So you can see we're slightly large here, but we can then kind of trim it up. And once you've got something that's going to match the die pretty well, you can go ahead, and I find it's easiest to take tweezers, and that will give you a good angle to pull off this backing. And then that can be placed on the die. Then you can use your tweezers to kind of get it in place. Like so. And then, once that is lined up, you can use the tweezers to pull off the top. And now you have a clear pad of thermal paste. This will turn liquid and it will kind of melt all over it, just like regular thermal paste would. So you can actually go even a little smaller than that, but it will settle in after a few heat cycles. But once you have that, you have it on there, we can go ahead and get this placed. Okay, and then I'm going to tighten this down in the 1, 2, 3 sequence. So we've got a 1, we've got a 2, and we've got a 3. And with that tightened down, don't forget to screw down your fan. And also, really don't forget to plug your fan back into the socket. So if you got lost and don't know which way this goes, it's the green wire on top and the black wire on bottom. And it is very fine. Okay, got that back in place. Okay, now let's deal with the SSD. So this is easy when you have everything pulled apart. Single screw. It pops up, you can take it off like so. The heat shield comes off like that. The new SSD goes in quite easily like that. Much easier than the original. The original was a little bit sticky, I feel like. Push it in at the 30-degree angle, and then it folds down. Make sure you have it centered, and we'll screw this back down. Now we have our 2 terabyte SSD in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to swing this back over like so, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the audio plugged back into its slot. Ooh, yeah, I do not find this one easy to do. Okay, so I do have that in place now. So if you can avoid undoing that, if you're just changing SSD, I would definitely recommend that. Let's go ahead and also get this screwed down. Oh, don't be an idiot though. Don't be an idiot like me. You gotta plug that battery back in. Plug that battery back in, otherwise you're not gonna be happy with yourself. Okay, with the battery plugged in, we can tighten down the heat shield, and then we will connect this last ribbon cable. And there we go. So we're just double checking we've got everything tightened back down that's needed. And now at this point I'm going to be putting this backplate on. And one of the funny things about this case is it actually lines up with the OLED fan better than the original fan, which I wonder if that is coincidence or not. And there we have it, glossy 2 terabyte 512 OLED to 2 terabyte and backplate swap. So just make sure that's snapped down of where it needs to be. Looks like a good fit. Feels nice. And we should be good to go. So let's go ahead and compare the cooling on this guy versus the regular cooling solution. Alright, so we are sitting in the benchmark screen, and you can see that when they're just sitting here idling, about to start the benchmark, This one's at 55 and 61, and this one's at 61 and 68. And so you can see it's much cooler, you know, somewhere around the 5 to 6 degrees cooler on the JSOX black backplate and the PTM7950. Now I don't know whether to attribute that to the 7950 PTM or the backplate, but let's see what it looks like while we're loaded in the benchmark. So right off the bat, 65 versus 72. Another thing is the fan is at 4,500 versus 5.2. Pretty big difference. And there we have it. This is literally a 5 to 8 degree difference as we go through this with lower fan speed. So I would say that the PTM7950 thermal upgrade is definitely worth it. Could have something to do with this JSOX backplate as well, but it's definitely an improvement versus the stock cooling solution. Okay, just because I wouldn't be able to sleep otherwise, I put the original backplate on to see if the JSOX backplate was making the cooling difference or if it was the PTM7950. And from the looks of it, it is a combination of both. As they're sitting here idling, there's about a 3 degree delta. This is about 56 and this is at 58. So 55, 56, 50, 57, 58, but let's go ahead and start the benchmark and see what it looks like during that. And yeah, it's looking like a 2 to 3 degree difference from the heat paste alone. So the back plate, this V2 backplate, was increasing the cooling, which makes sense. It has that big vent right there. However, what I ran into is the SD card slot was not lining up exactly right because it didn't seem to fit exactly right. It was very close, but not quite exactly right. And while it did work fine, the SD card went in. It seemed like it was putting strain on the edge. I had to kind of push it under the lip. So I'm going to stick with the stock backplate. And yeah, there we go. There's like a 2 to 3 degree difference between these two. And that's from the PTM7950. The other, 3 or 4 degrees we were getting were from the backplate. So, good to know. Okay, so to wrap things up, I will cut to the chase. And I will just say that PTM7950 is good for a 2 to 3 degree improvement in cooling, not to mention slower fan speeds. So that's good to see. And the cooling can be augmented further with a backplate like this one. That's the V2. It does also improve cooling performance, at least in measurable metrics, whether it's cooling your ICs and things like that. If it's pulling air over the right components on the back, leads, it's unknown at this point, but it does seem to improve cooling for the CPU and GPU. Now I've chosen to stay with the stock backplate just because I did notice that the SD card on this third-party backplate did not seem to line up exactly right. It seemed like some of the components near the bottom of the board were slightly taller than maybe what they were on the original, which was making it not close all the way, which made the SD card slightly snug, and I didn't like the pressure being on the SD card like that. So those are my thoughts. Those are my findings. PTM7950, good for a nice little upgrade that should improve your battery life because the fan turns slower. So probably worth a shot. Hope you liked this video. If you did, go ahead and subscribe and check out my other Steamdeck videos, and we'll see you on the next ones.